How did overhearing my wife mock me as the stinker turn into the moment she realized she had misunderstood everything about my life and my work? What she thought was harmless laughter with her mother became the start of a chain reaction she could not stop. By the time her attitude changed overnight, the systems I trusted had already been set in motion. Before we continue, we ask you to hit the hype button, subscribe, and like the video to help the channel grow. Tell us which city you are from in the comments. We would like to get to know our audience better. I came home early that Tuesday because the rain had flooded the job site. The pumps couldn't keep up with the runoff, and the supervisor sent us home around 3. I didn't call ahead. I never did. After 23 years of marriage, there didn't seem to be a need. The drive home was quiet. Raindrops streaked across my windshield, and the wipers beat a steady rhythm against the glass. I thought about nothing in particular. Maybe what we'd have for dinner. Maybe the game that evening. The usual empty thoughts of a man heading home after another day underground. The house was warm when I walked in through the garage door. I could smell something cooking. Chicken, maybe with rosemary. The kind of meal she made when she was in a good mood. I unlaced my boots in the mudroom, peeling off my rain jacket and hanging it on the hook where it always went. My movements were automatic. Quiet. The way a man moves when he's been doing the same thing for decades. That's when I heard her voice from the kitchen. "I know, Mom. I know." She was laughing. Not the polite laugh she used at dinner parties or the forced one she gave my jokes. This was genuine, unguarded, the kind of laugh that comes when you're truly entertained. I didn't announce myself. Something made me stop. Maybe it was the tone, maybe it was instinct, maybe it was the way her laughter sounded so free, so different from anything I'd heard directed at me in years. I stood in the hallway, just around the corner from the kitchen doorway, and I listened. He just came in the other day smelling like... I can't even describe it. Like something crawled inside him and gave up. More laughter. "No, seriously, Mom. I had to open every window. The neighbors probably thought we were airing out a crime scene." I heard my mother-in-law's voice through the speakerphone, tinny but clear. "I don't know how you do it, sweetheart. I really don't. All these years with the stinker." My wife laughed again. The stinker. That's perfect. That's exactly what he is. The stinker. Does he even realize? Does he know what he smells like when he comes home? "Mom, he's been doing this for 15 years. 15 years in the sewers. I don't think he can smell anything anymore. His nose probably gave up a long time ago. Well, at least the paycheck is steady. Steady and small." My wife sighed, but there was no sadness in it. Just resignation mixed with contempt. Linda's husband just got promoted again, vice president of something. They're going to Aruba next month. Arden's husband closed another deal, and here I am, married to a man who comes home smelling like the city's waste. Linda always did marry well. She knew what she was doing. She planned ahead. She thought about her future. I just fell for the first guy who was nice to me, and look where that got me. Married to a man who spends his days crawling through other people's waste. I stood there. The words landed like stones, dropping into deep water, one after another, sinking down to places I didn't know I had. Each sentence was a small wound. Not sharp enough to make me bleed immediately, but deep enough to leave scars I would only notice later. "At least he's not demanding," my mother-in-law said. "At least he doesn't make a fuss." That's true. He's easy, like a piece of furniture. He's just there. Reliable, boring, predictable. But there. Always there, whether I want him or not. The stinker. My mother-in-law laughed again. I'm going to use that from now on. How's the stinker? Is the stinker home yet? Has the stinker showered? Not yet. He usually doesn't get back until 5. I've got a couple hours of peace still. Peace. From me, from my presence. I was something she endured, not someone she wanted. I could have walked in. I could have confronted her. I could have made a scene, demanded explanations, forced her to face what she'd said. But I didn't. I stood there in the hallway, feeling something shift inside me. Something fundamental was realigning, like tectonic plates sliding past each other in slow motion. The ground I had stood on for 23 years was no longer solid. Instead, I backed up silently. I opened the garage door and closed it again, louder this time. I made noise. I gave her warning. I played the role she expected. "Evan? Is that you?" Her voice was different now. The contempt was gone, replaced by the pleasant neutrality she always used when I was around, like flipping a switch. "Yeah, site flooded. They sent us home early." "Oh, that's nice. Dinner won't be ready for a while, though." "That's fine. I'll take a shower." I walked past the kitchen. She was at the counter, phone pressed to her ear now instead of on speaker. Her mother had gone silent on the other end. My wife smiled at me, that practice smile, the one I now realized had no warmth behind it, and mouthed, "Mom says hi." I nodded. I kept walking. I didn't trust myself to say more. In the bathroom, I stood under water so hot it hurt. I let it run over me until my skin was red and my thoughts were clear. I wasn't angry. That surprised me. I expected rage, but what I found instead was something colder. Something that had been there all along, maybe, just waiting to be noticed. Clarity. That night, we ate dinner at the table like we always did. She talked about her day, about the women from her book club, about someone's daughter getting engaged. I nodded in the right places. I made the right sounds. I was reliable, boring. There, just like she said. She went to bed at 10. I stayed up, saying I wanted to watch the late news, but I didn't turn on the television. I sat in the living room in the dark, in my chair by the window, and I looked out at the street. The rain had stopped. The streetlights made pools of yellow on the wet asphalt. Everything was quiet. Everything was still. But inside me, something had changed forever. I thought about the last 23 years, the sacrifices I'd made, the extra shifts I'd taken so she could have nice things, so she could stay home when the kids were young, so she could have the car she wanted, the vacations she picked out, the life she designed. I thought about the overtime, the holidays I'd worked, the weekends I'd given up. I thought about how I came home tired every day, how I showered before I touched anything, how I kept my work clothes in a separate bag, how I did everything I could to minimize the parts of my job that might inconvenience her, how I tried so hard to be invisible in my own home. And I thought about the respect I'd assumed existed between us, the partnership I believed we had, the foundation I thought we'd built together. It was an assumption, nothing more. A story I'd told myself because the truth was too ugly to consider. The respect had never been there. Maybe it had existed once in the early years when we were young and everything was new, but somewhere along the way it had eroded, worn away like stone under constant water. And I hadn't noticed because I wasn't looking, because I trusted, because I assumed. I sat there until 2 a.m, and when I finally went to bed, my wife was asleep, turned away from me, breathing evenly. I lay beside her in the darkness and felt nothing. That was the strangest part. The emptiness where love used to be. It didn't hurt anymore because there was nothing left to hurt. The next morning I woke before sunrise. This wasn't unusual. My body had been trained by years of early shifts. But that day I lay still for a few minutes, watching the gray light creep across the ceiling. My wife slept beside me, her back turned, her breathing steady. I looked at the shape of her shoulder, the curve of her spine under the blanket, and I tried to remember the last time she had reached for me in the night, the last time she had touched me without necessity. I couldn't. I got up quietly and went through my morning routine. Shower, shave, coffee, toast. The motions were automatic, but my mind was elsewhere, traveling backward through time, re-examining memories I had stored away without inspection. 3 years ago, at her cousin's wedding, I was talking to her uncle about the city's infrastructure problems. He'd asked, genuinely curious, and she appeared beside me, laughter in her voice as she interrupted. "Don't get him started on pipes, Uncle Jerry. Once he starts, he never stops. It's like living with a very boring plumber." Everyone had laughed. I had laughed too. Because it was a joke. Because that's what you do when your wife teases you in public. You laugh along. You're a good sport. But now I remembered her eyes as she said it. The glance she exchanged with her mother across the table. The slight roll of her eyes that I had dismissed as affectionate exasperation. It wasn't affection, it was contempt. 5 years ago, at a neighborhood barbecue, someone had asked what I did for a living, and before I could answer, my wife had jumped in. "He works for the city, maintenance." She didn't mention the sewers. She never mentioned the sewers in public. I had thought she was being tactful, sparing me from having to explain a job that made people uncomfortable. But she wasn't protecting me, she was protecting herself. From the embarrassment of being married to a man who worked in the waste management system. 7 years ago, when her mother came to visit. I overheard them talking in the kitchen, a different conversation, but the same tone. "He's just not ambitious, Mom. He's content with where he is. He'll never be more than this." I had walked in, and they had gone silent, changed the subject, and I had let it pass, because what was I supposed to say? I liked my job. I was good at it. The city needed people like me, but that wasn't enough. That was never going to be enough for her. I drove to work that morning through streets I knew by heart. The route took me past neat houses with trimmed lawns, past the elementary school where my kids had gone, past the coffee shop where my wife met her friends. This was our neighborhood. Our life. The life I had built and maintained, literally and figuratively. At the locker room, I changed into my work clothes. The other guys were already there, Mike and Dennis and old Frank, who should have retired 5 years ago but couldn't afford to. "Hey, Evan, how's it going?" "Can't complain." The standard exchange. The same words we'd said 1,000 times. I pulled on my coveralls and laced up my work boots, and Mike made a joke about the rain yesterday, about how we were going to need boats soon instead of trucks. Dennis laughed. "At least you're used to working in water, right, Evan? Sewer water, rainwater, all the same to you?" "Pretty much." "I don't know how you do it, man. 15 years down there, I couldn't last a week." They said this often. All of them. It was meant as a compliment, I think. An acknowledgement that my job was harder than most. But there was something else in it, too. A distancing. An assurance to themselves that they were different. Better. I had never minded before. I understood that sewer work made people uncomfortable. I accepted it. I even took a certain pride in being able to do what others couldn't. But that morning, I heard it differently. I heard the assumptions underneath. The belief that anyone who did my job must be less somehow. Less intelligent, less ambitious, less worthy of respect. I thought about my wife's voice on the phone. The stinker. Like I was something to be tolerated, not valued. The site supervisor called us for the morning briefing. There was a section of old pipe near the river that needed inspection. The system was aging, some of those tunnels were 80 years old, and there were concerns about structural integrity. "Evan, I want you on this one. You know those old sections better than anyone." I nodded. Of course I did. I had spent years mapping the parts of the city that no one else wanted to think about. I knew where the concrete was crumbling, where the joints were weak, where the water pooled in ways it shouldn't. I carried the city's secrets in my head. The morning passed. I descended into the tunnels, into the darkness and the smell and the sound of water moving through ancient pipes. This was my world, the world my wife mocked, the world that made her ashamed. But it was also the world that kept her toilet flushing and her shower draining and her dishes clean. It was the world that kept disease away from her doorstep, that carried away everything she wanted to forget she produced. She never thought about that. None of them did. During lunch break, I sat in the back of the utility truck and ate my sandwich. The other guys were talking about the game last night, about someone's kid getting into trouble at school, about the price of gas. Normal conversation. Frank lowered himself onto the bench beside me, his old joints creaking. He was quiet for a moment, chewing his own sandwich, and then he said, "You all right, Evan? You seem different today." I looked at him. Frank had been doing this job for 38 years. His wife had passed 4 years ago, and his kids rarely called. "I'm fine." He nodded slowly, not believing me, but not pushing either. Sometimes the job gets to you, not the work itself, but the way people look at you when you tell them what you do. I didn't respond. "I stopped telling people years ago," Frank continued. "At parties, barbecues, whatever. I just say I work for the city, public works, people nod and move on. It's easier." "Easier for who?" He shrugged. "For everyone. They don't want to know what's under their streets. And we don't need to see the look in their eyes when we tell them." I thought about my wife saying maintenance instead of sewers at that barbecue. Hiding what I did, ashamed of who I was. "What if someone asks for details?" I said. Frank smiled, his weathered face creasing. "Nobody ever does. That's the thing about this job, Evan. People don't want details. They just want it done. They want to flush and forget. That's reality." I looked out the window at the street above us, at the cars passing by, at the people walking on sidewalks, at the whole world going about its business without a thought for what ran beneath their feet. "Maybe that's the problem," I said quietly. "Maybe forgetting too easy." Frank didn't answer. He didn't need to. That afternoon, someone made a joke about how we must be immune to filth by now, how nothing could bother us anymore. I didn't correct them. 3 weeks passed. I went to work. I came home. I ate dinner with my wife and listened to her talk about things that didn't matter to me anymore. I maintained the routine, the surface calm, the appearance of normalcy. But underneath, something was changing. I wasn't angrier. I wasn't sadder. I was just more aware. I noticed things I had overlooked before. The way my wife sighed when I came through the door. The way she kept her distance until I'd showered. The way she talked about her friends' husbands, the ones with office jobs and golf memberships and investment portfolios. She wasn't comparing me to them directly. She didn't need to. The comparison was implied in everything she said, everything she didn't say, everything she was. At work, I threw myself into the job. The inspection project in the old section of the system was taking longer than expected. The pipes were in worse condition than anyone had realized. Cracks, corrosion, sections that had shifted over decades of settling Earth. I documented everything meticulously. I took photos, I made notes. On a Wednesday morning in the second week, I was working alone in a section of tunnel that most of my colleagues avoided. It was deep, nearly 40 feet below street level, and the access shaft was narrow and old. The walls were lined with century-old brick, damp and moss-covered, the mortar crumbling in places. I had my flashlight and my clipboard and my waterproof camera. The tunnel stretched ahead of me, disappearing into darkness, the sound of distant water echoing off the curved walls. I moved slowly, checking the seams, looking for signs of failure. This was careful work, patient work, the kind of work that required attention to detail and a willingness to look at things others would rather ignore. That's when I saw it. At first, I wasn't sure what I was looking at. Something was wedged into a repair junction, a side access point that had been sealed years ago but had apparently been reopened at some point. The bricks were loose, stacked rather than mortared, and behind them was an object wrapped in black plastic. I stopped. My heart rate didn't change. My breathing remained steady. But my mind went from routine inspection to something else entirely. I approached the junction carefully. The plastic was industrial grade, heavy duty, wrapped multiple times, and secured with tape. The bundle was roughly the size of a large briefcase, maybe 18 inches by 12. I didn't touch it. Not yet. Instead, I noted my position, marked the coordinates using the system I had in my head, the mental map I had built over 15 years. I photographed the junction, the loose bricks, the wrapped bundle. Then, using my work gloves, I carefully moved the bricks aside. The bundle was heavy, maybe 15-20 pounds. I set it down on the tunnel floor and, after a moment's hesitation, carefully cut away the tape with my utility knife. Inside the plastic was another layer of wrapping, waterproof bags, vacuum sealed. Inside those was cash, bundles and bundles of $100 bills banded together with rubber bands. I didn't count it. There was no time for that. But there had to be at least $100,000. Maybe more. I sat back on my heels in the dim light of the tunnel, looking at that money, and I felt something cold settle in my chest. This wasn't random. This wasn't someone's forgotten stash. This was deliberate. Someone had used the sewer system, my system, the one I knew better than anyone, as a hiding place. They had accessed a sealed junction, hidden a fortune in cash, and walked away, expecting no one would ever find it. But someone had. I had. I thought about what to do. I could report it immediately. Call it in, have the supervisors bring in the police, let the authorities handle everything. That was the proper procedure, the legal response. But something stopped me. The location of this junction wasn't random either. This particular section of tunnel was connected to a municipal maintenance access point that I knew well. An access point that was rarely used except by senior staff. An access point that required specific keys that weren't widely distributed. Whoever had hidden this money knew the system, knew it well. I rewrapped the bundle carefully. I put the bricks back in place. I continued my inspection, documenting everything else I found, being thorough and professional and absolutely normal. But I didn't report the cash, not yet. In my truck afterward, I sat with my hands on the wheel and thought about what I'd discovered. The money was almost certainly connected to something illegal. You don't hide legitimate income in a sewer tunnel. And whoever had hidden it had access to parts of the system that were supposed to be restricted. I thought about the city's infrastructure, about the illegal dumping complaints we'd received over the years, about the contracts for repair work that always seemed to go to the same few companies, about the inspections that were sometimes cursory, sometimes skipped entirely. I thought about chain of evidence, about documentation, about the way things worked in the system, how you reported something and it went up the chain, and sometimes it reached the right people and sometimes it didn't. Sometimes reports disappeared, sometimes information was buried. If I reported this through normal channels, it might go nowhere. The money might vanish. The people responsible might be warned. And I would be just another worker, easily ignored, easily silenced. But if I documented everything first, if I built a case, quietly, carefully, the way I inspected pipes and mapped tunnels, then I would have something solid, something that couldn't be dismissed. I started the truck. My hands were steady. My mind was clear. For the first time in weeks, I felt something other than numbness. I felt purpose. The next few weeks required patience. Patience was something I had developed over 15 years of careful work in dark places. I knew how to wait, how to observe, how to document without being noticed. I began by filing a preliminary incident note, a general report about structural concerns in the old section of the tunnel, recommending further inspection. Nothing about the cache, just routine documentation that would establish my presence in that area, my professional reason for being there. Then, after hours, at home, In the small office I'd set up in the corner of the garage, I began my real work. I started a file. Physical, not digital. Paper and folders and photographs printed on my own printer. I dated everything. I noted times and locations and conditions. I recorded my observations about the junction, about the access points, about the keys required to reach that section of tunnel. I studied policies. Municipal reporting procedures. Chain of custody requirements. I educated myself on how evidence was supposed to be handled, how investigations were supposed to work, how documentation needed to be structured to be taken seriously. At the bank, I made a casual inquiry about large cash deposits and the reporting requirements. The teller was helpful. Currency transaction reports for anything over 10,000, suspicious activity reports for patterns that didn't fit. I thanked her and left. At the Municipal Compliance Building, I requested copies of city contracts for the repair work in my section of the system. The clerk was indifferent, bureaucratic, but the records were public. I paid for copies and took them home. In my garage office, late at night while my wife slept, I spread the contracts across my workbench and studied them. The names weren't familiar, but the patterns were interesting. The same 3 companies had been awarded most of the work. The bid amounts were curiously similar. The inspection reports following the repairs were signed by the same 2 employees. I didn't know what it meant yet, but I was starting to see connections. My wife, meanwhile, remained oblivious. She talked about her usual topics: book club drama, neighborhood gossip, the inadequacies of various service providers. I listened and nodded and said the right things. She still mocked me, not to my face, of course. She was more careful now when she thought I might overhear. But I caught fragments, phone conversations that went quiet when I entered a room, knowing looks exchanged with her mother during Sunday dinners. I noticed how freely she talked when she believed I was small, how careless she was with her contempt, because she didn't think I mattered enough to pay attention. I let her believe it. Her underestimation was useful. "You've been working late a lot," she said one evening, not concerned, just observing. "The old tunnel project. Lots of documentation?" She nodded, already losing interest. "Don't forget we have dinner with the Palmers on Saturday." "I'll be there." The Palmers. Dave Palmer was some kind of consultant. I'd never understood exactly what he did, but it involved suits and airports and impressive-sounding titles. His wife, Arden, was one of my wife's close friends. The kind of dinner where I was expected to be present but not particularly involved. I went. I sat through 3 hours of conversation about vacations and renovations and someone's impressive new whatever. Dave talked about market trends. Arden talked about their new kitchen. My wife smiled and laughed and performed her role perfectly. At one point, Dave asked what I was working on these days. Before I could answer, my wife jumped in. "The same old thing, underground stuff. You know Evan. He likes things that stay the same." Everyone chuckled politely. I smiled and nodded. But I noticed something else that night. The way Dave leaned back when I looked at him. The way his eyes slid away from mine just a moment too quickly. The small tension in his shoulders when my wife mentioned my work. Probably nothing. Probably just discomfort with the topic. Probably. I filed it away with everything else. The following week, a meeting invite appeared in my work email. A city infrastructure review was being scheduled. The mayor's office was concerned about aging systems, potential liability issues, the need for updated documentation before budget discussions. The meeting was 6 weeks out. High-level personnel would be involved: directors, finance liaisons, compliance officers, the people who made decisions. I looked at that invite for a long time. This was my opportunity. But I needed to be ready. I needed to have everything documented, organized, undeniable. I needed to have evidence that couldn't be dismissed or buried. I went back to the tunnel the next day. I photographed the junction again from different angles. I documented the access route, the security protocols that should have been followed, the gaps in procedure that allowed someone to move through the system unobserved. The cache was still there, waiting. Back in my garage office, I added to my file. I created a timeline. I mapped the connections. I built my case the way I built anything. Carefully, methodically, one piece at a time. My wife walked in once, late at night, looking for something in the garage. She saw the folders spread across my workbench and wrinkled her nose. "What's all this?" "Work stuff. The tunnel project." She nodded, already turning away. "Don't stay up too late." She didn't look at the documents. She didn't ask what I was actually doing. She had no curiosity about my work, no interest in what I thought or discovered or cared about. I was invisible to her, a piece of furniture, the stinker. But that was fine. That was exactly what I needed. Something changed in my wife 3 weeks before the scheduled review meeting. The shift was subtle at first, almost imperceptible, but I had spent my entire career noticing small changes in complex systems. A crack in a pipe wall, a slight discoloration in concrete, the faint sound of water moving where it shouldn't. I was trained to see what others missed. I noticed it first at dinner on a Sunday evening. She asked about my day, not in the perfunctory way she usually did. How was work? Fine, good. But with actual attention. She looked at me when I answered. She followed up with questions. Her eyes stayed focused on my face instead of drifting toward her phone or the window. That tunnel project sounds important. What exactly are they reviewing? I set down my fork, looked at her directly. This was new territory. In 23 years, I could count on one hand the number of times she had asked a genuine follow-up question about my work. Just maintenance concerns, budget allocation, the usual. She nodded, but her eyes didn't drift away like they normally would. And you're involved in that, at a high level? I've been documenting section integrity for months, so yes, they'll want my reports. That's wonderful, honey. It's great that they recognize your expertise. Honey. She hadn't called me that in years. The word hung in the air between us, strange and unfamiliar, like a sound from a language I had forgotten. I watched her through the rest of the meal. She smiled more. She touched my arm when she passed my chair. She suggested we watch something together after dinner, something I might enjoy, not just her reality shows. She even brought me coffee without being asked, setting it down beside me with a small smile. Later, lying in bed, she moved closer to me, put her hand on my chest. I could feel the warmth of her palm through my shirt, a touch I hadn't felt in longer than I could remember. I've been thinking, she said softly. We haven't been as connected lately. I want to change that. I stared at the ceiling. The shadows played across the plaster, shapes I had memorized over decades of sleepless nights. What brought this on? I don't know, just realizing what's important, I guess. You work so hard. I don't tell you enough how much I appreciate it. Her mother stopped calling the house. That was the second thing I noticed. For years, barely a day went by without that phone ringing, without my mother-in-law's voice coming through the speaker, without the two of them laughing about whatever they laughed about. Their conversations had been the background noise of my life, a constant reminder of the world they shared that excluded me. Now the phone was quiet. When I asked about it, my wife just shrugged. Mom's been busy. You know how she gets. I knew exactly how she got, and busy wasn't it. In 30 years of knowing that woman, I had never once seen her too busy to call her daughter and share her opinions about everything from the weather to my inadequacies. The third thing was the way she watched me when I worked in the garage, when I came home from work, when I sat reading in my chair. She watched me with an expression I couldn't quite read, attention mixed with something else. Wariness, maybe, like someone watching a sleeping animal, unsure when it might wake. One evening, I caught her standing in the doorway of my garage office, just looking at the folders on my workbench. Her arms were crossed, her face tight with something that might have been concern or might have been fear. What are those for exactly? Documentation for the review, reports, photographs, data. Seems like a lot. It's a thorough review. They want everything organized. She nodded slowly, chewed her lip the way she did when she was nervous, then carefully, Is everything okay at work? No problems? No problems. Why? Just checking. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. I worry about you, that's all. She worried about me. This was new. This was very new. In all our years together, I couldn't remember her ever expressing worry about my well-being. Annoyance? Yes. Impatience? Certainly. But worry? That required caring about the outcome. I continued my preparations. The file was nearly complete now. I had photographs, coordinate data, documentation of access protocols, copies of contracts, a timeline of when work had been done and by whom. I had the chain of evidence mapped out, the reporting procedures memorized, the presentation organized. The cache remained in the tunnel. I checked on it once more, verified it was undisturbed, photographed it again for updated documentation. I noted the serial number ranges on some of the bills, information that could be cross-referenced if necessary. Everything was in place. Everything was ready. My wife's attitude had shifted dramatically, but I understood now what was happening. Word had gotten out somehow, through some channel I couldn't see, that the review was going to be comprehensive. That documentation was being gathered. That questions might be asked about things that usually went unquestioned. Someone was nervous, and that nervousness had reached my wife. What I didn't know yet was how directly she was involved, whether her changed behavior was just fear of association, fear of what my investigation might reveal about people she knew, or whether it went deeper than that. Whether the contempt she had shown me for years was also mixed with guilt for things I didn't yet understand, I would find out soon enough. The Friday before the review, I organized my final documents. I made copies, one set to present, one set locked in a safety deposit box, one set with a trusted friend who didn't ask questions. Redundancy, protection, the same principles I applied to infrastructure systems. My wife made dinner that night, a nice dinner, the rosemary chicken she only made for special occasions. She lit candles, she poured wine. The table looked like something from a magazine, carefully arranged, deliberately beautiful. "What are we celebrating?" I asked. "Nothing special. I just wanted to do something nice for you." We ate together, the candles flickering between us, and I watched her face in the shifting light. 23 years of marriage, 2 children, now grown, a lifetime of partnership, or what I had thought was partnership. "Can I ask you something?" I said. She looked up, attentive, alert. "Of course." "Do you remember when you fell in love with me, that first year?" Something flickered in her eyes. Surprise, maybe, or uncertainty. A flash of something vulnerable before she composed herself. "Of course I remember." "Why did you love me?" She was quiet for a moment, considering her answer, choosing her words with more care than she usually did. "You were kind, steady, you made me feel safe. And now? What do you mean? Do I still make you feel safe?" She reached across the table and took my hand. Her fingers were warm against mine. Her grip was tighter than it needed to be. "You've always made me feel safe, Evan. Always." I looked at our intertwined hands, at the wedding ring she still wore, at all the years compressed into this moment. "I hope that's true," I said quietly. "I really do." The city infrastructure review meeting was held in the main conference room of the municipal building, the one with the long walnut table and the official portraits on the walls. Mayors from decades past looked down from their frames, their expressions stern and formal, witnesses to everything that happened in this room. There were recording devices set up at both ends of the table, small red lights blinking steadily. A stenographer sat in the corner, fingers poised over her machine. A row of chairs lined the back wall for observers, carefully positioned to see everything without participating. I arrived early. I wore my one good suit, the same one I wore to weddings and funerals, slightly dated but clean and pressed. I carried my documentation in a leather briefcase my son had given me for Christmas years ago, the brass clasps worn smooth from use. The room filled gradually. Department heads arrived first, claiming their usual seats, shuffling papers and checking phones. Finance liaisons followed, their folders thick with spreadsheets. Compliance officers, their expressions carefully neutral. 2 people from the mayor's office, young and serious. A representative from the city attorney's department, recording everything in a legal pad. This was as official as it got, short of a courtroom. I recognized some faces. My site supervisor, looking uncomfortable in a tie he kept adjusting. The director of public works, a man I'd seen maybe 3 times in 15 years, his presence here signaling the importance of this meeting, and in the row of observers at the back, a few faces I hadn't expected. Dave Palmer, the consultant from the dinner party, the man who talked about market trends and vacation properties. He was sitting at the end of the row, trying to look casual, but his eyes kept darting toward the front of the room where the department head sat. His leg was bouncing. His hands kept moving from his knees to his pockets and back. I filed that away. Another detail, another piece of the pattern. The meeting began with routine matters, budget reports, system statistics, scheduled maintenance, the usual bureaucratic choreography that preceded anything important. I waited. I was scheduled to present my section report toward the end, after the senior staff had set the context. My supervisor spoke first about the old tunnel inspection project. He covered the general findings, aging infrastructure, areas of concern, recommendations for prioritized repair, standard material, safe material, the kind of report that made everyone nod and nobody remember. Then they called me. I stood. I walked to the front of the room. My footsteps were steady on the carpet. My hands didn't shake. 15 years of working in dark tunnels had taught me to stay calm in uncertain situations. I set my briefcase on the table and opened it. The click of the clasps was loud in the quiet room. "Thank you," I said. "I'd like to present my findings from the Section 7 inspection, with particular attention to an irregularity discovered during my survey." The room shifted. Attention sharpened. People who had been checking phones put them away. The word irregularity in this context meant problems, and problems meant liability, and liability meant everyone in this room had reason to pay close attention to what came next. I laid out the photographs first, the junction, the loose bricks, the wrapped bundle. Each image was clear, time-stamped, professionally documented. During my inspection on March 15th, I discovered a concealed package at coordinates. I read off the location data, precise to the meter. This junction is part of a sealed access point that should have been inaccessible without specific authorization. The package contained a significant amount of cash, U.S. currency, primarily $100 bills. Murmurs around the table. The director leaned forward, his brow furrowed. Why wasn't this reported immediately through normal channels? I wanted to document the context first, I said, because the location suggested the perpetrator had detailed knowledge of our system. Unauthorized access to this section requires keys that are issued only to senior maintenance staff and certain contracted workers. Someone knew exactly where to hide this money and how to get there without being detected. I laid out the next set of documents. The contracts, the inspection logs, the timeline. Each page connected to the next, building a picture that became clearer with every detail. In reviewing the authorized access for this section, I found that repair work was conducted by 3 companies: Meridian Infrastructure, Gateway Systems, and Belmont Contracting. These companies appear on the majority of contracts for maintenance work in multiple sections of the old system. Their bid amounts are consistently similar, within 3% of each other on nearly every project. Their inspection approvals are signed by the same 2 individuals. The compliance officer's face had gone pale. The finance liaison was already making notes, her pen moving rapidly across her pad. I've also documented, I continued, that several inspection reports from the past 3 years showed discrepancies between the work allegedly performed and the actual condition of the infrastructure. Sections marked as repaired show no evidence of recent work. Materials charged to the city were never installed. Hundreds of thousands of dollars were billed for work that exists only on paper. I was methodical. I was calm. I presented each piece of evidence in order, explaining the significance, connecting the dots. This was how I worked in the tunnels. Careful observation, systematic documentation, logical conclusions. In the back row, Dave Palmer had stopped pretending to be casual. He was staring at the table in front of him, his face the color of old paper. His hands gripped his knees so tightly his knuckles had gone white. "The cash," the city attorney's representative said carefully. "Do you have any indication of its origin?" I documented the serial number ranges of a sample of bills. I would recommend that information be cross-referenced with law enforcement databases. However, based on the amount and the concealment method, this appears to be proceeds from illegal activity, most likely connected to the contract fraud I've documented. Someone was skimming money from the city and hiding the evidence in a place they thought no one would ever look. The director turned to look at the compliance officer, then at the finance liaison, then, slowly, at the row of observers. Dave Palmer stood up abruptly. His chair scraped against the floor, loud in the sudden silence. "This is ridiculous. He's a sewer worker. You're going to take documentation from a sewer worker over established contractors with years of city contracts?" The room went quiet. Every eye turned toward him. I looked at him. Just looked. The contempt in his voice was familiar. I had heard it before, in a different voice, on a different day, from the mouth of my own wife. The sewer worker, the stinker, the man who didn't matter enough to pay attention to. "Mr. Palmer," the director said slowly, his voice cold. "What exactly is your interest in these proceedings?" Dave's mouth opened and closed. He looked around the room, at all the official faces now turned in his direction, at the stenographer recording everything, at the recording devices documenting every word. "I'm just an observer. I have business interests in municipal contracts, general interest, professional curiosity." "Do you have a relationship with the companies named in this documentation?" Silence. A long, heavy silence. Then, "I may have done some consulting work. That's not illegal." "No," I said quietly, "but filing false inspection reports is, and hiding cash proceeds in municipal infrastructure is, and conspiracy to defraud the city is." The compliance officer was already on the phone, speaking in low, urgent tones. The city attorney's representative was whispering to someone beside him. The meeting had shifted from routine review to something else entirely. The beginning of a reckoning that couldn't be stopped. I watched Dave Palmer's face as he realized what was happening, as he understood that everything was documented, everything was official, everything was already beyond his control. The machinery of justice had begun to move, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. His eyes met mine across the room. There was fear there, and hatred, and something else. The sudden recognition of someone he had underestimated completely. The stinker, the piece of furniture, the boring husband at dinner parties who didn't matter enough to notice. I smiled, just slightly, just enough for him to see. "The internal audit will need to be comprehensive," the director was saying. We'll need to trace the contract approvals, the fund disbursements, the personnel involved at every level. I gathered my documents. The meeting wasn't over, but my part was done. The evidence was presented. The process was in motion. The system I had trusted was now working exactly as it should. As I walked toward the door, I passed the row of observers. Dave Palmer was still standing, his phone in his hand, making frantic calls that wouldn't help him now. His voice was desperate, pleading with whoever was on the other end. I stopped beside him, leaned in close enough to smell his cologne, expensive, the kind he probably used to impress people at dinner parties. "You should probably call your lawyer," I said quietly. "And maybe your friend's lawyer, too, the one who married well." His face went white, whiter than before, if that was possible. His phone slipped in his sweating hand. I walked out of the conference room. The hallway was quiet, fluorescent lights humming overhead, municipal carpet stretching toward the exit. Behind me, I could hear raised voices. The meeting continuing without me, the process I had started churning forward like the machinery of the city itself, steady and inexorable. My phone buzzed, a text from my wife. "What time will you be home?" I looked at that message for a long moment. Such a simple question, such ordinary words. But I could see underneath them now. I could see the fear that must have prompted them. The realization that whatever she knew, whatever connection she had to this mess, it was already too late. I typed my response. "Soon. We should talk." I didn't wait for her reply. The investigation moved fast. By the end of the week, Meridian Infrastructure, Gateway Systems, and Belmont Contracting were under formal review. Their offices had been visited by city auditors accompanied by law enforcement. Their files were being examined. Their employees were being questioned. The cash from the tunnel was recovered and documented. Serial numbers were traced. The amount was confirmed at just over $400,000, proceeds from years of overcharging, fraudulent billing, and kickbacks that had flowed through the municipal contracting system like water through corroded pipes. I followed the news from a distance. I wasn't part of the investigation anymore. I was a witness now, my documentation forming the foundation of a case that was growing larger every day. At home, my wife's transformation continued. She was attentive, solicitous, desperate in ways she tried to hide. She made my favorite meals. She laughed at my jokes. She asked about my day with an intensity that bordered on panic. But she didn't ask directly about the investigation. She danced around it, mentioned it only in passing. Terrible what's happening with those contractors, as if it were distant news that didn't concern her. I let her maintain the pretense. For now. On Saturday evening, we had dinner at the kitchen table, just the two of us. The house was quiet. The neighbors' lights glowed through the windows. "Your mother hasn't called in weeks," I said. "Is she okay?" My wife flinched, a small movement, quickly controlled. "She's fine, just busy." "You should call her. Tell her I said hello. Maybe tomorrow." I set down my fork, looked at her directly. "When did you find out?" Her face went still. "Find out what?" "About the contracts, about Dave, about where the money was coming from." She stared at me. For a long moment she said nothing. Then something crumbled behind her eyes. The pretense, the performance, the years of careful masks. "I didn't know everything," she whispered. "I swear I didn't know everything. But you knew something." Silence. Then slowly. Dave talked, at parties after a few drinks, about opportunities, about how the city systems were so old nobody really checked anything, about how much money was just sitting there, waiting for people smart enough to take it. And you listened. I laughed. I thought he was just bragging, being big. You know how men are. She stopped, realized what she'd said. "I mean, you know how some men—" I waited. "Last year," she continued, her voice barely audible, "Dave mentioned he might have some consulting work for me, nothing major, just helping with paperwork. He said it was all legitimate, just complicated. And he paid well." "How much?" She looked down at her hands. $30,000, over about 8 months. I absorbed this. $30,000. Passing through her hands, connected to fraud, connected to the cash in the tunnel, connected to everything. "Why?" I asked. "We weren't struggling. I made enough." Her laugh was hollow, bitter. Enough. That word. Then do you know what it's like, living on enough, while watching everyone else have more? While watching Linda go to Aruba and Arden renovate her kitchen and everyone around you moving forward while you just stay in place? So you took bribes. Consulting fees. But there was no conviction in the correction. She knew what they were. "And you mocked me," I said quietly. "The stinker. The one crawling through sewage while you took money to help hide fraud." She looked up. Her eyes were wet. You heard that? I heard everything. Evan, I didn't mean... Yes, you did. Every word. I stood up from the table. I'm going for a walk. Evan, please, we can talk about this. We can figure it out. I'll tell them I didn't know what the money was for. I'll cooperate. I kept walking, out the kitchen door, into the garage, through the garage door into the cool evening air. Behind me, I heard her crying. Big, gasping sobs, the sound of someone realizing that everything was already beyond repair. I walked down the driveway, down the street, past the neat houses and trimmed lawns, past the lives that looked so perfect from the outside. The streetlights made pools of yellow on the pavement. The same lights I had walked under for 15 years, coming home from work, coming home to her. I thought about everything that had happened, the overheard phone call, the discovery in the tunnel, the weeks of careful documentation, the meeting, the unraveling. I thought about justice, about how it came not in dramatic confrontations, but in paperwork and procedures, in evidence carefully gathered and properly presented, in systems doing what they were designed to do when someone finally gave them truth to work with. My wife had laughed at me. Her mother had called me the stinker. Dave Palmer had looked past me at dinner parties, seeing nothing worth noticing. And now they were all caught in the machinery I had set in motion, not because I had done anything illegal, not because I had sought revenge in anger, simply because I had done my job, carefully, thoroughly, the way I had always done it. I walked for an hour. When I came home, the house was dark except for the light in the bedroom. My wife was in bed, pretending to sleep. I didn't join her. I went to my garage office instead. I sat in my chair, in the darkness, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. On Monday afternoon, 2 investigators came to the house. They had questions for my wife. I wasn't there when they arrived. I was at work, completing routine inspections, being the reliable municipal employee I had always been. But she called me afterward, her voice trembling. They know, she said. They know about the payments, about what I did. What did you tell them? Everything. I told them everything. My lawyer said it was better to cooperate. That was probably smart. They said if I help with the investigation, if I testify about what Dave told me about the structure of the payments, they might be able to work something out. She was crying again. Evan, I'm scared. This is really happening, isn't it? Yes, it's really happening. What's going to happen to us? I thought about the question, the us in it, as if there was still an us to consider. That depends on a lot of things, I said finally. On what they find, on what you knew and when you knew it, on whether you're actually helpful to them. And you? What about you and me? I didn't answer. I didn't have an answer yet. I'll be home in a few hours, I said. We can talk then. But when I got home, talking wasn't what happened. My wife was on the couch, a glass of wine in her hand, her eyes red from crying. Her mother was there too, the first time she'd been over in weeks. My mother-in-law looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before, not the contempt I was used to, not the dismissive tolerance she usually showed, something more complicated. Fear, maybe, and something that might have been respect. Evan, she said, her voice was quiet, careful. I owe you an apology. I stood in the doorway. For what, specifically? She swallowed. For the way I've talked about you, the way I've treated you, you didn't deserve that. No, I agreed. I didn't. I didn't understand what you did, what your work actually meant. Most people don't. She nodded, looked down at her hands. The investigators came to see me too. I didn't know anything about the money or the contracts, but they said you were the one who uncovered it, that your documentation is what's driving the whole investigation. I waited. You found it because you were doing your job, she continued. The job we made fun of. The job I called. She stopped. Couldn't say it. The stinker, I finished for her. You called me the stinker. She flinched. My wife flinched too. The words hung in the air between us, heavy with everything they represented. I didn't understand, my mother-in-law said again. Any of it. No, I said. You didn't. Neither of you did. I walked past them, through the living room, toward my garage office. Behind me, I heard them whispering. About me, probably. About what I was going to do. About whatever future they were now forced to consider. I didn't care. In my office, I opened my laptop and checked the news. The investigation was expanding. More contractors were being subpoenaed. More city employees were being questioned. The mayor had issued a statement promising full transparency and accountability. My name wasn't mentioned in any of the articles. I was just a municipal employee or a city worker who had discovered irregularities during a routine inspection. Anonymous, invisible. That was fine with me. I didn't need recognition. I didn't need credit. I needed only one thing: for the truth to come out, for the people who had cheated and lied and hidden their crimes in the darkness beneath the city to face consequences. And that was happening, day by day, piece by piece. Justice wasn't dramatic. It wasn't cinematic. It was paperwork and procedures and systems grinding forward. But it was real. My phone buzzed. A text from my son. Saw the news about the city investigation. Is that connected to your work? I typed back, yes. A pause. Then, that's incredible, Dad. What you did. I'm proud of you. I looked at those words for a long time. Proud of you. Maybe that was enough. Over the next 2 weeks, the investigation expanded beyond what anyone had initially predicted. The cash in the tunnel was just the visible symptom of a much larger infection. Years of falsified reports, bid rigging, embezzlement, and kickbacks were systematically uncovered. Dave Palmer was arrested on a Tuesday morning. I heard about it from a colleague at work, who had heard about it from someone in the mayor's office. The charges included fraud, conspiracy, and money laundering. His bail was set high, but he paid it. He was walking around free for now, though everyone knew it wouldn't last. The contractor executives followed. Meridian Infrastructure's CFO, Gateway Systems owner, 3 members of Belmont Contracting's management team. They appeared in news photos, walking into the courthouse, their lawyers beside them, their faces carefully composed. Inside the city government, heads were rolling. The 2 employees whose signatures appeared on all those fraudulent inspection reports were suspended, then terminated, then charged. A mid-level supervisor in the Public Works Department was named as a co-conspirator. A finance officer who had approved questionable disbursements resigned before she could be fired. I watched it all from the periphery. I went to work, I inspected pipes, I documented what I found. I was reliable and thorough and exactly who I had always been. But people looked at me differently now. My colleagues, my supervisor, the director who had once barely acknowledged my existence. They saw me with new eyes. "You really stuck your neck out," my supervisor said one afternoon. "Filing that report, going through all that documentation, most guys would have looked the other way." "It was just evidence," I said. "I just documented what was there." He shook his head. "Don't undersell it. What you did took guts. And it took brains. The way you put that presentation together, that wasn't just showing up. That was strategy." At home, my wife was subdued, cooperative with the investigation, consulting constantly with her lawyer about what to say and what not to say. Her mother had retreated entirely, rarely calling, never visiting. One evening, I found my wife at the kitchen table, going through financial documents. Her expression was haggard. "The lawyer says they'll probably go after the consulting payments," she said without looking up. $30,000 plus penalties." I sat down across from her. "What about the other charges?" "Maybe obstruction, maybe accessory, but probably just the financial stuff if I keep cooperating." She looked at me, her eyes searching. "What happens to us, Evan, when all this is over?" "I don't know," I said honestly. "I've been too focused on the investigation to think beyond it." "Do you hate me?" "I don't hate you," I said slowly, "but I don't know if I can forgive you. The money, maybe. That was greed and poor judgment. But the rest of it, the way you talked about me, the way you laughed at me with your mother, the years of contempt I didn't even know about." She was crying, quiet tears streaming down her face. "I was unhappy. I took it out on you because you were there, because you were easy, because you never pushed back. I'm pushing back now," she nodded. "I know, and I deserve it, all of it." The final hearing was held on a clear day in May, 3 months after my initial presentation. The courtroom was packed, media in the gallery, officials in the front rows. Everything formal, recorded, documented. I was called as a witness. I took the stand, stated my name and occupation, and answered questions about what I had found and how I had found it. The prosecutor walked me through the evidence, the photographs, the coordinates, the timeline, the contracts, everything I had compiled in my garage office late at night while my wife slept and dreamed of lives she thought were better than ours. I was calm, precise, professional, just a man doing a job, just a municipal employee who knew the tunnels beneath the city better than anyone else. When it was over, I stepped down from the witness stand and walked toward my seat in the gallery. As I passed the defense table, I saw Dave Palmer watching me. His face was gray. His expensive suit looked rumpled. Our eyes met. In his gaze, I saw everything. The contempt he had shown at dinner parties, the dismissal, the absolute certainty that I was beneath his notice. And I saw what had replaced it now, understanding. The recognition of what his underestimation had cost him. I didn't smile, I didn't gloat. I simply looked at him, letting him see me clearly, perhaps for the first time. The verdict came 3 weeks later. Guilty on multiple counts, fraud, conspiracy, money laundering. Dave Palmer, 8 years. The contractor executives, 3 to 12 years. The city employees, probation to 5 years. My wife's involvement was resolved separately. Financial penalties, community service, probation, and a slow, quiet exile from every social circle she had spent years trying to enter. I watched it all happen. I didn't orchestrate it. I didn't need to. Consequences flowed naturally from actions, like water finding its way through ancient pipes. On the day the sentences were announced, I sat in my garage office with the news playing on my laptop. I read the numbers, I closed the laptop, I stood up. The stinker. That's what she had called me. But the stinker had brought down a conspiracy. The stinker had sent criminals to prison. The stinker had done his job when it mattered most. I walked out of the garage into the cool evening air. The streetlights were coming on. My neighbor was mowing his lawn. A dog barked somewhere down the block. I looked up at the sky, at the stars just beginning to appear, and I smiled.